In this lesson, we will introduce the 21 CLD Knowledge Construction Rubric and Decision Tree. These capture the big ideas of knowledge construction, and they're a useful framework when designing learning activities so that students can construct and apply knowledge. Are we providing learning opportunities for students to go beyond reproducing what they have learned, to generate ideas and understandings that are new to them, and where appropriate, is this across more than one subject area? The 21 CLD Knowledge Construction Rubric examines whether students are constructing knowledge by generating ideas and understandings that are new to them. In stronger activities, knowledge construction is the main requirement of the learning activity. The strongest activities require students to apply the knowledge they have constructed in a different context, helping them to deepen their understanding further and to connect information and ideas from two or more academic disciplines. We can capture the big ideas of knowledge construction by using a decision tree. A decision tree is a visual way of representing the big ideas in knowledge construction. It is designed as a number of questions, each of which corresponds to a big idea. As you can see, there are 4 questions in the knowledge construction decision tree. The first question relates to whether the activity requires knowledge construction. The second is to determine whether knowledge construction is the main requirement of the activity. The third question asks if the students are required to apply their knowledge in a new context, and the fourth asks if the learning activity is interdisciplinary. The power of using a decision tree is that it provides a framework for designing learning activities, and in this case, designing opportunities for knowledge construction. Considering each of these questions is useful when designing a learning activity. For example, there are times when you will want students to construct knowledge, but there are also times when they will need to revise or reproduce information they are given. Similarly, there are times when you will want knowledge construction to be the main requirement of an activity, but other times when you will not. On some occasions, you will require students to apply their knowledge in new context, but on other occasions this will not be required. Finally, there will also be times when learning is interdisciplinary. It all depends on planned learning outcomes and the needs of your students. Not all learning activities will have each of the levels, but over a period of a year, for example, you should look to include learning activities at all of the levels. You need to bear in mind, as you look at the decision tree, that the numbering system is a code, not a score. For example, a code 1 merely indicates that students are not required to construct knowledge. It is not a value judgment about the quality of the learning activity. We can capture all of these ideas by using the knowledge construction decision tree. For knowledge construction, there are 4 questions in the decision tree. The first relates to whether the activity requires knowledge construction. The second is to determine if knowledge construction is the main requirement of the activity. The third question asks if students apply their knowledge to a new context. And the last one determines if the activity is interdisciplinary. Considering each of these questions is useful when designing a learning activity. Not all learning activities will have each of these levels, but over the period of a year, for example, you should look to include learning activities at all of the levels. For example, there will be times when you will need students to construct knowledge. That is, to generate ideas and understandings that are new to them. But this is not the main focus of the learning activity. At times, knowledge construction may be the main effort of the activity, where students spend most of the activity time and effort generating new ideas and understandings. There are other times when you will want students to apply knowledge they have constructed to support another knowledge construction task in a new context. But sometimes you will want to provide cross-curricular opportunities where student work involves content, important ideas, or methods from different academic subjects. It all depends on planned learning outcomes and the needs of your students. As with the other 21 CLD dimensions, you need to bear in mind as you look at the decision tree that the numbering system is a code, not a score. For example, a code 1 merely indicates that the learning activity does not require knowledge construction. This doesn't mean that the activity is of limited value and is not a value judgment. So let's look at the knowledge construction decision tree. The first question asks if the learning activity requires knowledge construction. If the answer to this question is no, then the learning activity is coded at a 1. The learning activity does not require students to construct knowledge. Students can complete the activity by reproducing information or by using familiar procedures. This is an example of a classroom activity that can be coded as a 1.
And I want you to find out one piece of information about the project that is happening with Chekhov's story author. Okay?
Story and
Lit for life.
I got it right here. Use the Chekhov app to write and record dynamic ebooks, which can be used by learners across the globe to develop their literacy skills anytime, anywhere, even when there is no literal adult available to assess them.
Excellent.
As I said, the first question asks if the learning activity requires knowledge construction. If the answer to this question is yes, then I ask if the main requirement is knowledge construction. If the answer is no, the learning activity is coded at a 2. In other words, the learning activity does require students to construct knowledge by interpreting, analysing, synthesising, or evaluating information or ideas. But the activity's main requirement is not knowledge construction. This is an example of a classroom activity that can be coded as a 2.
So boys, what I want you to do is give me an idea of the inspiration behind your rapid racing game.
Well, we looked at quite a lot of classic racing games like Need for Speed and Asphalt because we both play those sort of games, which helps quite a bit because that influenced us to put obstacles and ramps in the game. Also, everyone really knows Mario Kart and that there's quite a bit of obstacles in Mario Kart, so that's what's influenced us to put in the cannons and the ramps and everything like that.
Okay, and when you went and researched those games, did you talk about a bit being unique? What did you mean about being unique?
We wanted to be unique because people don't want just a copy of another game because they might already have that game and they just think, well, this is pretty much the same, I'm not going to bother wasting my money. So if you create a unique game, it's going to sell and people will be interested in it rather than just, oh, it's just another racing game, I don't really want it.
Okay.
So if the learning activity's main requirement is knowledge construction, I must move to the next question. Are students required to apply their knowledge in a new context? If the answer is no, the learning activity is coded at a 3. This means that the learning activity's main requirement is knowledge construction, but the learning activity does not require students to apply their knowledge in a new context. This is an example of a classroom activity that can be coded as a 3.
And today is going to be about those really important decisions we make as a team from those photographs. So that first bit, choosing our 6 photographs. And I've put together a question rubric that we're going to have a look at from what you told me last week so that we know which ones we're going to choose. Last time we looked at Kodak's 10 tips for taking photographs, didn't we? As a way to help us know whether photographs were good photographs or not. And let's move this up a little bit. And I've put together, from what you told me, this rubric. Does anybody already know what a rubric is? So we're going to get our pictures on the media drive and have a look at them one at a time as a team. And the first question we're going to say is the subject in focus? Now if it's not, we haven't taken a very good photo, have we? If it's not, we stop there because it's only worth 1 point. We give it 1 point. If it is in focus, we're going to keep going. Is the lighting appropriate? No. So it's in focus, but it's not really lit in a way that means we can see it. We haven't either turned away from the sun or made sure it's out in the daylight or used the flash correctly. No, so it's worth 2 points. And here, these are how these relate to our tips, aren't they? Our first one's about focus, is that question. Our second one's about outdoor lighting or about using the flash, are to do with that one, aren't they? The ones that we as a team have given the highest point score. Does that make sense? Tremendous. So our job now is going to be to get with our team, to have the rubric, our questionnaire, open on one of our laptops at least, to have the media drive. Inside the pictures folder is the Year 4 GCP folder, that folder open, and then to go to your team's camera folder. So if you can't remember what number your team folder was, you're going to need to ask one of us in a minute to look at that list, all right? But it may not be that you need your laptop, it might just be that of your team you only need 2 of them to start with, okay? The first job, look at that rubric, have your pictures ready, and we're going to go through the pictures one at a time as a team and answer these questions to give them a score. So at the end, we can say these are our highest scoring photographs, they're the ones that we believe we should use. And I'm going to give you about 15 minutes for that talking, that sharing and that decision-making process, because it's the most important part of what we do today. Does that make sense, team? Right, okay.
If the learning activity does require students to apply their knowledge in a new context, I move to the next question and ask if the learning activity is interdisciplinary. That is, does it have learning goals in more than one subject? If not, then the learning activity is coded at a 4. This means that the learning activity's main requirement is knowledge construction, and the learning activity does require the students to apply their knowledge in a new context. But the learning activity does not have learning goals in more than one subject. This is an example of a classroom activity that can be coded as a 4.
We did research for other games there, such as My Sims Racing or
And what decisions did you make about those games? I see you have some level of writing beside them.
For My Sims Racing, we like the way that the font relates to the game, and it gave us the idea that the cars are not all the same, so it would be better if they were all different instead of the same.
Okay, and what about the other racing games? Why did you look at those?
Well, for Ford Racing, we liked the way that the logo was clearly written at the top, so you could see it.
And did you do that on your own cover?
Yeah, we read it at the top. We
Okay.
read it at the top so everybody could see it.
Finally, if the learning activity is interdisciplinary and it does have learning goals in more than one subject, then the learning activity is coded at a 5. This means that the learning activity's main requirement is knowledge building, and the learning activity does require students to apply their knowledge in a new context, and the knowledge building is interdisciplinary. The activity does have learning goals in more than one subject. So to recap, when you're designing a learning activity in which you want to focus on knowledge construction, you need to keep in mind the questions outlined in the decision tree. Does the learning activity require knowledge construction? Is the main requirement knowledge construction? Are the students required to apply their knowledge in a new context? And is the learning activity interdisciplinary? In this way, the decision tree helps you to be more aware of the type and quality of knowledge construction you need to plan for. This decision tree can also be represented as a rubric. As you can see, each of the numbers 1 to 5 outline the criteria for the condition of the code. For example, Code 2 reads, "The learning activity does require students to construct knowledge, but this is not the activity's main requirement." You can decide which you find easier to use, the decision tree or the rubric, when coding learning activities. In this lesson, we have discussed the knowledge construction rubric. In the next lesson, we will look at and examine some 21 CLD anchor lessons.